This evening, we have a seasoned book club discussion moderator in Paul Langendorfer, who has done this. I think this is about the third, or possibly at least the third,
Or,
right?
yep.
Yeah, third time, and we don't know how much longer he can do it, but he's gotten pretty good at it. Uh, the book, of course, is Ed Achorn's book called "The Summer uh, of Beer and Whiskey," which is primarily about the 1883 season. That would be the second season of the American Association, and and what transpired. And it's just a very exciting season. Ed Achorn is a great author, great writer. He's a Pulitzer Prize winning or Pulitzer Prize finalist. Uh, but he is really. I read his book about Lincoln's second inauguration, which is a wonderful book in itself also. So, Paul, I want to turn this over to you. It's a great book, and I know you'll give it justice.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Well, before we do that, we're gonna do this because it is the summer of beer and whiskey. So we're gonna crack this open so we can actually
Yeah.
go ahead and have a little something to enjoy while we're talking about the finer things in life. As you know, he mentions as I am a German, so I have to do this. So anyway, so summer of beer and whiskey. This is my second time reading the book. I will share some of my thoughts. I have some statements and ideas for talking, and obviously throw it out. Anybody can chat, whatever you'd like. This discussion is open. So I first of all, I thought it was really a great segue for this book because we've been doing Matt Albert's books, which kind of give us more of a succinct little picture of some of the things that are actually detailed in this book and plague this book and plague these leagues. We talk about racism, we talk about umpires, we talk about alcoholism, and we talk about these things very succinctly in Matt's book. And then we have this microcosm in Summer and Beer and Whiskey that is actually right. It's a season just immersed in all of this. So I've got a couple of quotes that I've actually done. I'm going to read some quotes and kind of lead it into discussion from there. I took a lot of notes with this book, and hopefully my Kindle doesn't die, but either way, I have it over here. So that 1883 season is a season that marvelously opens a window, as baseball always does, into the culture of America of its time. The harsh struggle and the cruel mocking racism, the heavy drinking, and the triumphant, glorious spirit of the individual achievement of the day. Mark Twain described the game, and Mark Twain from my last two books, described the game as a perfect image of his America. The very symbol, the outward and invisible expression of the drive and the push and rush and struggle of the raging, tearing, booming 19th century. So I just throw a few things out about my sentiments about the book. Again, this is my second time reading it. For me, it ebbed and flowed a bit. There were chapters that I just was absolutely drawn to, such as the Cap Anson chapter 10, which I'll talk about a little bit later. And the last two chapters describing the pennant race. I think in some ways the strength of the book also made it difficult to kind of read and actually just read through, especially if you weren't reading it from cover to cover. There's so many characters presented in certain circumstances, it was hard to maintain the flow of the book as it jumped from player to player and team to team. The only real thing I wish he had done a little bit was I wish he had more instances of the standings in more succinct places or perhaps smaller chapter breaks. I'm actually currently reading Eric Larson's The Demon of Unrest, and he actually has very, very if you've read it, Joanne, he does it where he'll have a chapter that might be 2 pages.
Right.
But it actually really breaks it down in a lot of ways. So your mind isn't like, wait a minute, where was I? What was I just reading?
And you don't get exhausted, and you read that, and you want to read the next one. You want to read the next.
Yes.
Yes, that is
so. I'll throw this out there, and you can add to it if you'd like, Joanne, since you already commented. I just first of all wanted to know what people's thoughts of the book as a whole and his writing style.
Well, I particularly liked his writing style. And funny you mentioned that chapter 10, because that was my favorite chapter, mostly because I know a little bit about Cap Anson and that whole issue with the Fleet Walker. But I like what he did about it. I mean, it was just it was an incident, but he has so much detail in it, and it just flows so very well, and it just captivated my interest, even though I read a lot about it. I think he's done the best job of writing about that, about the racism and Fleet Walker than anybody else I've ever read. It just captured my interest with all the detail and just dragged me into it. I just loved it.
I mean, I like I said, I agree with you. I agree with you, Jack. I actually, we can jump into this real quick. I mean, if you'd like, since we brought it up here. Hey, there's Matt. Just talking about your books and how well this one segued into it. Did you have your hand raised, good sir? You can certainly speak up as you would like. Do you have your beverage of choice tonight, Matt?
Yeah, I saw the roll call there. I've got a bottle of whiskey or 20 over there that I might dive into.
But as he points out, whiskey it's not what this book is about.
No.
And I'll read a quote for you if you're a whiskey
I
guy.
appreciate it. I think it's important to note that Ed Achorn writes very well, in particular because he's a journalist, or at least he was. He was
Right.
Up in Providence, so he's able to really put a synthetic story together that's interesting and engaging, and it makes you just want to turn the page, kind of like you mentioned earlier, Eric Larson. He's a page turner kind of guy, and it's really meticulously researched. We had Ed on with our Philly chapter about a year or two ago to talk about this book, and it was a blast. So anyway, I just wanted to say, his writing style is really engaging, and it's a lot of fun to read.
Fair enough. So I'm gonna call on Joanne real quick because I mean, you've read. What do you think of his style? I mean, I think he's a fantastic writer. I can only hope to be as even close to a writer as he is, but I'm just curious what you thought of it since you kind of picked up on the mini chapter ideas. To me, it just seemed like they did get clogged down. Not all of them, but some of them.
No, and I think that's the style that was very acceptable back when that book was written. But he gets into it, draws out these themes that in great detail. But I think I find that books written more recently has more of the shorter chapter theme. Although I'm reading one right now, which is kind of like an Eric Larson book. But it was Tony Horwitz who wrote a lot of his
Great author.
books. Oh, fantastic. Unfortunately, he passed away, but I've read them all. But I'm reading his Midnight Rising right now, which has a similar feel to how Eric Larson writes. And he's written these books in the 21st century. But I find that books written in like the 90s and even before, that they seem to want to pack a whole lot into one chapter. And I have the same feeling on that. You get exhausted by the end of it. And when you do the shorter chapters, you really get going on one of them. You're really inspired and you're really enthused with it. And although it's short, he says, oh, well, it's only short. I'm going to read the next one. And it carries you through. And it's kind of like, well, it's a style also that actually Charles Dickens did, because he was writing in newspaper stories where you would have to have a cliffhanger on the end of the story in order to get them to read the next one, which might not show up for another week. But that's the same feeling for it, that a shorter chapter leaves a cliffhanger, enthusing you to go on to the next one, while the longer ones, you're just exhausted and you go for the beer and then you forget where you were. But it's still a good book. You're learning a lot as it's going along. It's almost like more of a textbook than it is a book written for entertainment. Now, that's not to disparage this book. It is very good. And maybe the best thing you can do is maybe split the chapters in half, figure out how many, if you ever look ahead and say, okay, this chapter is 20 pages long. All right, I'll put my bookmarker halfway through. And that creates your own artificial cliffhanger. Makes you come back.
I thought for me, what I thought was, I like what you were saying about that. I was thinking to myself, because the second time I read it, how could I actually make this a little more different for me? And I thought one thing I could actually do is maybe actually, as he's going through and talking about the players, literally pull the wiki page up next to me and read that and then go back to the
Yeah.
book, something like
Right.
that. But
Mhm.
one of the things I did really like about these accounts and some of the longer chapters where he was fantastic at is his game accounts.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
love the
Mhm.
way he actually, it was literally like reading a newspaper, like we mentioned before, he was a journalist. So I really
Right.
like the fact that it felt like we were reading a journalistic account of that game of the day. You really felt like what was going on and what happened. So does anyone else want to throw anything out there about just the book in general or his writing style? And then I'll come back around to you, Jack, here after that.
Yeah, I'm just curious. What did which book did everybody enjoy more? This one or 59 and 84?
Hmm.
Hmm.
I like this one better because a Philly team wins, but that's very biased.
I like 5984 because I think that you're really following one player, one person.
Yeah.
I felt as I was reading this book, one of the biggest things I wish he had done was followed a team, be it either the Athletics or be it the the Browns. I really would have liked the Browns and just I felt like that's what I was in the Brown story, and then all of a sudden I'm reading about somebody who's playing for the Eclipse. I'm like,
Mhm.
wait, what happened to the Brown? Okay, and then I have to go back to it. So that would be my sentiment. So
Well, I kind of felt the same way. It was just a little bit too much, too many, a lot of
yeah,
players, a lot. It was a lot for me to keep straight, which is why I
yeah,
like the other one better. Because I said just one player, you read about all his foibles and everything else. I can't remember the name of the book we read. It was a while ago, but was packed with photographs and stuff. But they were lovely photographs, and I wish he had had some more, photographs too. That's a minor quibble, of course, but because
well,
he did have some. But
that's kind of what I meant when I said I wish he had. So if you're going to go ahead and you're going to do hey, we're talking about the Eclipse. Maybe I know he had him in there a few times, but I wish I would have seen the standings more. So I
yeah,
would have
he did
had
have
better
some.
ideas of
Uh-huh.
how this was really important or what it was or how it was.
Yeah.
So
Mhm.
um,
I
I'm
will
going to go and
say
jump.
really
Go ahead.
quick.
I'm sorry.
I will say really quick on my second time reading the book through of 3, I read it. I just read the chapters that heavily dealt with the athletics, and it was more concise. It just flowed really well. Like
Hmm.
I didn't have to worry about Chris von der Aha or focus on the Eclipse or something like that. I could go Bobby Matthews and Jumpin' Jack Jones and the disasters near the end of the season where they almost blow it. And it was all just like really quick. So as like you mentioned, a team history, there is a way to do it that way. You just have to kind of painstakingly figure out where you got to be chapter wise.
That's interesting. I like that sentiment, Matt. So, um, excuse me, Jack, I'm going to come back over to you. I have this at the end as a discussion point, but since you brought it up, I'm going to go there now.
Mhm.
Um, I want to talk about chapter 10. How does the author treat racism in baseball? Do you like his portrayal, the way he depicts the players? One thing that really stood out to me, first of all, I thought that was really interesting. Like, I love whereas other chapters that kind of annoyed me a little bit, I actually like to learn a little bit about each one of the Moses Fleetwood, and then we had
Right.
Day, and we had the
Right.
different African American ball players. So
Yeah. Mhm.
I do think one thing that is really interesting, which is telling for me, is that if you read the epilogue in the very end, Cap Anson is pretty much left out. So I think
Yeah.
I think that's his sentiment about Cap Anson. But since you brought it up, Jack, what are your thoughts on that racism and anybody else who wants to jump in on that?
Well, I thought he handled it really well. And he talked one time about how the racism against Walker was getting more, I think he used the word sinister toward the end of the season. So he did a good job he didn't pull any punches. And I thought it was a well balanced and again an extremely detailed portrayal of that particular of that whole particular era. Again, it was favorite chapter, and of course I'm biased because I happen to know a little bit about it anyway, but I thought he did an excellent job of, he didn't sugarcoat anything, and he packed a lot about individual players in that chapter, not just Cap Anson, not just Walker, but other people too, even some on the fringes as well. So I would not have changed anything. It was a masterful job, I thought.
Yeah, excuse me, I like that chapter so much that it inspired me to actually look into Fleet Walker's, the details of his 1884 season. And so far, I've logged all of Toledo's games, got a box score for all 104 of their games, and I'm plotting Walker's participation throughout the season. He basically disappeared like in early July, apparently got injured. Foul tip, hit him in the shoulder or something. Broken collarbone, broken shoulder, the papers speak of. But he only played about a half a season.
A smart guy too, college guy. And
Yeah,
everything.
that's amazing.
Yeah.
Total misfit.
Yeah.
In terms of his quote colleagues, unquote.
Yeah.
And what are your, you and I almost did the same thing with Fleet Walker. When, after I read this, the first time I decided to look up what the response was in Philadelphia on his first road trip. And the newspaper account, I forget which one, mentioned that the Philadelphia crowd applauded him as he came to bat, and juxtapose that with the situation with Ben Chapman and the Phillies, some years later in 1947, you begin to think, what happened with the baseball fandom there? That's just a total anecdote, it has nothing to do with the chapter, but it did spurn some interest in Fleet Walker for me as well.
I don't know what happened to the baseball fandom there. You guys are the ones that booed Santa Claus. So I just, it is what it is, man.
1967, sure, let's talk about
it. Yeah.
Sorry, we're all friends here, Matt.
Yeah. Notice how
So-
Matt rattled off the year right away.
Exactly.
Several of us are friends, right?
Yeah.
Hey,
Well,
So what are your
besides-
thoughts, Bob, since you, go ahead.
No, just besides knowing that Matt must have loved that account of that Philadelphia celebration and parade at the end of the after they secured the championship. But I was getting back to chapter 10 and Fleet Walker. What I found interesting was that in 1887, when the color line was drawn by the International League, actually, in a meeting up by you in Buffalo, I know that the Binghamton team that was featuring Bud Fowler and I'll think of the other fellow in a moment, both black players. They were the players of that team, the white players on that team, kind of expressed very adamantly that they were going to strike, and they were, because these two black players were on the team, and they essentially forced those players on the team. But they also forced the hand of the owners of the International League teams in 1887, who did draw the color line by saying that they would no longer allow new black players to play.
Right.
So, much to his credit, Fleet Walker held on, went off to Syracuse and held on until 1890, and literally becoming the only black playing in any professional ball, organized professional ball, even in minor leagues. So that was interesting. I was a little bit surprised at the end when, in the epilogue, when he began to review, some of these individuals and what they had done. And when it came to Fleet Walker, what he didn't mention was that Fleet Walker had committed a homicide in that time period. Now, he was acquitted of it, but I was kind of surprised that Ed didn't, just strike that balance in there, being a newspaper guy, and maybe he didn't feel it was relevant to the story. I'm not sure, but maybe it said something that Fleet Walker had it up to there. I do have the book here. I haven't read it yet. It's a very small book that he wrote. He and his brother Wendy wrote about like the Back to Africa movement, and that he probably didn't see any future for African Americans in in the United States. So it was kind of it says something in a way. It says something about how powerful the sentiment was to keep the game segregated, and of course exacerbated by our friend Cap Anson.
I think he really, in my opinion, he really vilified Cap Anson in the chapter and even afterward. I mean, he never mentions at all, at least not that I remember, that he was actually in the Hall of Fame, that he just really vilified Anson. So it's interesting, just in a quick side note, as Pete Rose died a few weeks ago, and my wife and I and other baseball fans have been talking about should be in the Hall of Fame. And I said, well, the problem that I have is that you have people like Cap Anson that are in the Hall of Fame, right or wrong. So Pete, whatever he did or didn't do, he's paying for the sins of the past in a lot of ways. But that is a discussion for another day. So I just thought it was really interesting because I actually mentioned Cap Anson in my conversation about Pete Rose a few weeks ago. So I'm going to move ahead.
Can I make one comment about Cap Anson? I was in a discussion
for
with
$1.
with Ed Hartig, the Chicago Cubs historian, who has forgotten more about the Cubs than most Cubs fans will ever know. And he said, Jack, everybody talks about Cap Anson shouldn't be in the Hall of Fame and everything, but look at it this way. I said, everyone back at that time felt the same way, but they all hated Cap Anson. If they were so much for blacks and letting them in baseball, they could have voted for them just to get back at Cap Anson, whom they all hated. The fact that they didn't shows that they believed the same way that Cap Anson did, but they weren't as just vocal about it. And I think that's just an interesting point.
I just think that the Hall of Fame as a whole, we could sit here and we could go through with a fine-tooth comb why people are there, why they're not there.
Right.
As I've done more reading on this, it just fascinates me. King Kelly's in the Hall of Fame, who routinely cut from first to third.
Right.
So how many of those runs are really not runs? So, but anyway, let me go ahead. I've got a couple more points and move on a little bit if we can. I wanted to talk about Chris von der Ahe. I think I've said it right because I've been grilled by you all. Quote here is, as a baseball owner, he was George Steinbrenner, Charlie Finley, and Bill Veeck, all rolled into one. Haughty, temperamental, driven to win, widely experimental, and madly in love with a dazzling show. He had a splash of Yogi Berra in him, which surfaced in the expression of Zen-like axiomisms. I said I'd also add P.T. Barnum to that list. If he wanted to make money, von der Ahe would find a way to make baseball popular again. For God's sakes, he was putting fireworks on display for 25 cents.
Mm-hmm.
So I just wanted to ask what people think. Did the book do a good job in portraying von der Ahe? I mean, I think that one of the things I really liked about this book was I think that Ed Achorn shined in the way he humanized him, especially in the epilogue where he basically said, he talked about the regifting of the watch that Sullivan threw at him, and then he handed him back. And von der Ahe, there we go. I'm going to mess it up again. I guarantee it. Anyway, so von der Ahe, I'm studying German. And my last name is Langendorfer. I should get this, but it's not going to happen. Anyway, show her the regift of the watch where he gave it back to him, and he paid him the 1883 salary, and Ted Sullivan was his pallbearer. So I just wanted to, for those of you that are more scholarly in these von der,
Yeah.
Chris,
Chris, yeah.
what do you think of the portrayal of Chris in this book?
Well,
Can I get the pronunciation in German?
Can you get the pronunciation in German? I don't
Yes,
know.
would like to.
I
would
need
like to
something
give you an
stronger than the
audio
Miller Lite to
version.
probably get it right.
I'll give you the Miller Lite German pronunciation as I understand it. It is Christian Friedrich Wilhelm Finderache. That's the best I can do.
That's
Das ist meine
fantastic.
Deutsch für heute.
Ich sprechen Sie Deutsch?
Ja, ich
Ja, ich
spreche,
spreche gut.
ich spreche gut.
So
yeah, I thought he was pretty benevolent towards Chris. I thought he made an attempt to really humanize him. You know, I found myself actually warming up after reading Tom's book many years ago. I always like, you know, held him a little bit at arm's length, but I think in a sense Ed was able to like kind of like, you know, show the humanity in the guy. You know, it was his money that was being spent.
Yeah.
He was trying to put a big product on the field and keep everybody entertained. And you know, I'm sure his emotions ran away with him at times. I found an interesting contrast between him when he threw the watch at well, what's his
Sullivan.
name? Yeah, and that was interesting. His treatment of Sullivan was very interesting because, you know, he really got into, you know, talking about what his kind of management style was, and you know how he brought the best out of the Browns players. You know, you keep hearing about you know Kaminsky being the captain of the team, and you hear very little about Sullivan.
So I'm going to ask you this since you were bringing him up, Peter, and I'll throw this out there for anyone who wants to add to this. Do you think they would have beat Philadelphia if they'd retained Sullivan? I mean, we're playing hypotheticals, but how much of an impact did he have? I think they said he went 9-6 after he went away, but do you think that would have made a difference?
Oh, you know, I don't know. I mean, you could see that what was happening to both teams, the Athletics and the Browns, that their pitching staff, you know, had been, you know, essentially decimated by the season. You know, they weren't getting the rest they needed. They were playing above and beyond, beyond all, you know, measure of today, what we even consider to be, you know, humane. Yeah, so it's hard to say. I don't know if I could draw that distinction, but I thought he did a credible job. Sullivan did a credible job for a long time with that team, leaving them in shape and in reach of the pennant. That's what I, you know.
One of the interesting thoughts about that is on the flip side, you could look at the other way too by not retaining Sullivan and actually putting Comiskey in that situation is what springboarded obviously Comiskey to go and manage, you know, 800 odd games and become the man that we know him as today, Comiskey Park, and so on and so on. So.
Yeah, I mean, and you also have to realize, I mean, the Browns are really on the cusp. By 1885, they win then 4 consecutive championships of the American Association. So, and by the way, Chris Vanda, I'm sorry, Tom. He'll always be Chris Vanda how to be. I'm sorry, but the idea that that he did then win those pennants, and by the way, he is this year's 19th Century Baseball Committee's overlooked legend. So we'll see what that does. I don't know what it means.
So I think any discussion of the early American Association has to include Fanderaha, and I think they're almost inseparable. And what Achorn really masters here is he doesn't turn this into a pseudo Fanderaha biography. and instead injects, other characters into the story. I'm usually not a fan of, season stories where it's told through the lens of 2 or 3 different characters. I think there's too many historical forces at work that can't just be distilled down into 2 or 3 people. But he does it he uses a lot of people in this book, and we've already listed off probably 7 or 8 of them already, that were integral to this entire story. But what he does is he does talk about, Achorn does, about Van der Aha's background, his, starting the league, and, how important he was to the league. But he doesn't overly emphasize maybe his role a little too much. So I think he treats Van der Aha just right, to the extent that maybe we should ask Ed to write a full-length biography, because that's really what the guy needs. Guys like Van der Aha, Al Reach, those guys, they really do need biographical book-length treatment, which they definitely deserve.
Any other thoughts or comments on Mr. Or Chris? We're going to go with Chris.
Mr. Albertson?
Well, I agree with,
Oh, I'm sorry.
yeah, Achorn.
Mr. Albertson, I did a full-length biography on Van der Aha.
I absolutely didn't know that. So I apologize.
Well, that's why I keep interjecting in with my little, and Peter also gives me little tips.
Now I'm going to look up your book.
The only full-length biography of Van der Chris Van der Aha and the St. Louis Browns is the name of it. It is still in print. It's
Great book,
available on Pocol Press.
What's the publisher again?
Pardon?
What's the publisher again?
Pocol Press. It's POCOLPRESS.
So that'll be my next book that I'm going to go ahead and present on, and we're going to have Joseph come back.
Now, I don't want to be plugging my book, but I just wanted to make that correction because there is a full-length biography treatment of Mr. Chris.
Well,
thank you, Peter.
Well, I'll do the Jack, did you have something else, or if not, I can jump into my next
No, go ahead. Yeah.
inquiry.
Yeah.
So I'll throw this out there, and Joe, since you went ahead and did a lovely biography of Chris, even though I'm just going to stumble on it. So this is something that I know this was early in the book, but I really this fascinated me. And I've got a little bit of kind of some notes here, but I'm just going to throw these out here. So I really love the focus early on. It was a culture difference, if you will, the Protestant upper class National League. You had the Beer and Whiskey League and Van der Chris, and how he created for what was his people in a way, German people and the working man, 25 cents versus 50 cents. So you had Chris's opinion and his sentiment, which was beer and wine, the German looks as gifts of God to be enjoyed in moderation for lightening the cares of life and adding to its pleasures. I read that to my wife and said, now you understand why we do this when there's football on TV. Formerly Americans, and this is for you, Matt, formerly American drank scarcely anything else than whiskey, frequently very bad whiskey, and the consequences were quarreling, strifes, and fights. See the correlation here, Philadelphia whiskey, now Americans drink almost as much beer as the Germans do, and whereas Americans used to pour everything down their throats standing, they now sit good-naturedly and chat over a good glass of beer without flying into another's hair. The German attitude towards Sundays burst from their home on the Lord's Day, filling the streets with laughter and chatter as they made their way to such umbrageous enclosures as beer gardens. Music, dancing, ball games, and other amusements are indulged with a zest which shows the intensity of pleasure realized by the participants. For them, such pleasures were soul feasts. He, Chris Van der Ahe, had a vision of making a day at the ballpark a more exciting experience than ever before, with cheap tickets, booming beer sales, and big crowds adorned by beautiful women. From laborers to wealthy gentlemen, a league that would make it possible for a working man to enjoy a beer at the ballpark with his wife. What I took of that description I thought was fascinating was This description is interesting as it harkens to the days of the Elysian Fields, and it's ironic in a way the Eastern Leagues has moved away from this. So then I want to read this one, and I want to contrast with Mr. Hurlburt, okay? Many such customers had given up on baseball in the 1870s, disgusted by the gamblers, boozers, thugs, and painted strumpets who had infiltrated ballparks. I love that one. Hurlburt hoped to lure back the middle class through a Puritan agenda of no Sunday ball, no beer sales, no gambling on the grounds, and a 50-cent admission high enough to keep the riffraff out. The owners felt they needed strong controls because players tended to be hard-drinking, self-serving, sometimes dishonest young men. It was Herbert's agenda to control these young men. Some young men plunged into that world, drank to excess to the point that they showed up at the ballpark the next day with throbbing headaches and slurred speech. If every player who drinks is banished, who will play baseball?
Paul, that's
Yes.
Hurlburt, not Hurlburt. There's no R after the U.
You know,
Pronunciation, you know? I know. We just have to
Okay.
keep pointing this out.
It's Miller Lite. Work with me.
Joanne,
Yes.
how would you know?
Hey, Joanne, I want to know your opinion of the strumpets at the ballpark as a lady among us.
There was
I
a-
love that part.
There was a painted strumpets, he said.
Painted strumpets.
Painted strumpets.
Okay, so I have several questions about these passages. First of all, I wrote down, were there really strumpets in the stands? Is what I wanted to know. Because
Absolutely.
I mean, if you're hockey fans, they're called puck bunnies. I don't know what they would be called in this age, but whatever. I asked this question. I said, did this work? Did Von der Ahe create or exacerbate the problem? The Philadelphia A's drew 300,000 fans, but what kind of fans were they? We still see drunkenness among the players, gambling with an umpire of all people, and were there really strumpets in the stands? So tell me, we've got two different literary leagues. We've got two different classes of people. We've got 300,000 fans. What did he create? Was it good? Was it bad? Was it wonderful? Was it not?
It was wonderful and it was great and everything. And the other people who were criticizing it were just jealous.
Of the strumpets?
Yeah. They just wanted more strumpets. They were strumpet less.
Sorry.
Well, you have to
I
think.
also
of
add that Von der Ahe in his, I'm sorry.
I would say most of the fans in the ballpark were certainly potential customers for the strumpets, right?
Yeah.
That's why they would go there.
Possibly. Yeah.
And may I also
Sometimes-
add that Chris injected a horse race track in later
Yes.
years
Yeah.
into
Yes.
Sportsman's Park.
Yeah.
And had a shoot the chutes water flume slide in right field. So if you were tired of going to the game or after the ball game was over at night, he would bring in electric lights and they would take their jollies by going down a water flume slide that he called to shoot the chutes from the German.
He would love the ballpark in Phoenix, would he not?
Yes. Right. Yep.
So Paul, I'll say this regarding Philadelphia's 300,000 fans. Athletic Park is squarely in the center of what was then and is today called Brewery Town. And there's a lot of trolley lines and train lines going into that neighborhood. So, these are fans that certainly enjoyed a pint or two. I attended an American Historical Association conference some 10 years ago, one of which was about whiskey making in the latter part of the 18th and early 19th centuries. And it mentioned a good Methodist needed to drink at least 2 or 3 quarts a week of whiskey in order to, keep up with appearances. Aside from that, I think as far as fans go, they want to go where the action is. I found in my 1895 presentation on the Phillies fan vote contest that fans then weren't any different than fans are today. They want to see a winner. They want to see hard playing baseball players, and they don't mind characters. Now that might have, as the decade goes on with the Athletics in particular, that might have, been a bit of a drag for Philadelphia, because we noticed in in the first volume of Bauer's book, he talks about the 1886 A's and how they were practically falling over themselves on the field because they really did have a serious drinking problem even for that era. So at this early stage, they're a good team. That's who's coming to the ballpark because the Phillies went 17-81 and 1. Oh, and in case anybody wanted to know, I threw in Joseph's book into the chat there.
We get an autographed copy after this.
Thank you so much, sir. You can be my publicist.
So what are your thoughts? I mean, I guess what's interesting to me is, first of all, I personally love I loved the Germanness of that, and just how that, to me, it was really interesting that he brought up the religious side of it, how you have this, how the Germans basically were like, look, we worked all week. Sunday is our day to party, and we're going to go out there and we're going to party. And Chris fed right into that.
Yeah.
So I absolutely loved it. I mean, he talked a little bit about the baseball and its draw to the immigrants in the book as well, but I think he literally hit on that perfect formula. But I guess the question, like I said, I'm curious about is it almost seems like, he really pushed that, that the liquor and this and that, all that forward, but yet he also took a hardline stance against the players that they drank. I mean, he cut a guy for drinking and then re-signed him. In a lot of ways, it was very hypocritical. So I don't know what you guys think of, the contrast between the two.
So I'll use a modern example. Jesse Cole, the Savannah Bananas, banana ball, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's baseball. They do it a little differently, and that's because I don't necessarily say it's a gimmick, but it's something different. It's something to excite people. It's something to get them into the ballpark.
Mm-hmm.
So the National League's already well established. They've got great players. American Association's got great players too, and at this early stage, they're not as top tier maybe as the NL clubs. So they got to do something different to bring these people into the ballpark. And it's really a marketing strategy that's pretty successful. So it's for the fans to bring in the money, let's keep the money in the ballpark and we'll deal with the issues and limit them as much as we can on the field. Because if it gets terrible, as we noticed in the Bauer books, then people are going to start going away. So we got to have a fun atmosphere. We got to do something different than a National League. But at the same time, we've got to keep it up to snuff on the field.
If you recall last April, the keynote address at the Fred by Mike Halpert kind of looked at Holbert and at Vonderhaar as the icons as contributors to 19th century baseball and putting down those things that made baseball survive into the 20th century. Because Holbert was dead before Vonderhaar was involved with in any meaningful way with Major League Baseball. Michael looked at Chris as the kind of the showman and give them a good time. Just the things you've been talking about, Paul, and mentioning here. And he was always looking for ways to get another buck of revenue to come on in, and he was trying to manage his team. He may not have had the greatest grasp of baseball strategy, but he did have the sense to hire people who could play the ball, or at least give Comiskey enough and Sullivan enough rope to hang themselves, and they brought in a pretty good team. Holbert on the same token, but he puts together a league of limited number of teams with territorial integrity and even the idea of Sabbatarianism and no alcohol he was trying to do the same thing Vonderhaar was, because he was identifying his market and saying, I'm going to play to them. And the market he had was the middle class, upper middle class, and through. And Chris's was anybody who had a quarter.
And let's not forget, the difference here with Hulbert is he had to contend with, a depression. The Panic of 1873 squarely hits the United States economy by 1876. So you need to make sure the teams are playing their schedules to, endorse and improve upon a high quality product to maintain it. By the time we get to these early 1880s, 83, 84, that panic has subsided, and it allows this kind of a thing to germinate. So then the National League was, warranted in what it did, but it was a little behind.
What Mike Halpert stressed too was that Hulbert was in for making money for the whole National League, while Chris, he wanted to make money for himself, and that was it. He made Mike made the comment that he saw that he knew that by coddling the fans, they would return more times and spend money at his ballpark. So that was a big difference, another big difference between the two people.
That's a great point, Jack. I didn't really
Yeah.
think about it, but you're spot on.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
yeah. And I think we see that.
agree.
Yeah.
I
Go
agree
ahead.
with Jack's point there, but I think they had different goals.
Yep.
A part of that, Hulbert was trying to wipe out the National Association, or at least establish his National League as the dominant, controlling interest of professional baseball, and he did it. He may have had a difficult economic time to go through, but by the time he inculcates Spalding with these ideas and Arthur Sodlin and other folks, they keep a focus on through into the 20th century of what baseball organizationally should look like. And Chris certainly was looking out for Chris, no doubt. But I would dare say at least half the National League owners and maybe a majority of the American Association were doing the same thing.
Yeah,
I read the Hulbert. Oh, go ahead, Woody.
I was going to say
Sure.
that's one of the main weaknesses in the American Association is no sense of a unity, a single organization that everybody belonged to. It was too much individual owners trying to go after their own benefit. That's one of the, compared to the National League, that was their main weakness organizationally.
Mm-hmm. Bob, what were you saying about Hulbert and his vision or whatever? I read the Hulbert correspondence at the Chicago History Museum, and he got into a discussion with one of the owners of an American Association. I wrote it down, but I can't remember off the top of my head. And he was just not just almost pleading with the guy, look, this is for the betterment of the sport. You can't have the beer. You can't have the playing on the Sunday. You can't have these cheap games. You must do this for the benefit of the whole sport. In essence, what he was saying all the time in all his correspondence with people. And at the same time, he wished him well too. I don't know if that was crocodile's, not crocodile tears, but off the side of his mouth. But he really had a genuine interest in the game and a genuine interest in some of the people he was corresponding with too.
Yeah, I think, I think he just had competing visions.
Yeah.
Hulbert had a vision of this very parochial game. He's coming off the experience of the National Association, 1871 to 75, which really was a very loose, and he brought to the game this idea that it should be actually players should be like workers, management would be management, and he had this vision of who his customer was going to be, and then Chris came along actually the year after Hulbert died. He comes along and has this another vision of something completely different, of people having a lot of fun, people coming to the park on Sunday, people being able to come in for 25 cents, people able to drink all the beer they wanted to, and that was his vision, and I think in a sense. Who would you say won out? Well, to a certain degree, I guess they both won out.
Speaking of shameless plugging, my SABR talk in January is about how Hulbert threw all of his friends under the bus to get ahead. based on all based on all primary sources too. So stay tuned. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, let me go ahead and I'm going to throw one more question out there because we're almost out of time here. I'm going to give a couple more quotes and then I'll ask my question. Matt, you actually kind of touched on it, but I'd like to know, curiosity's sake. So, St. Louis fans are being treated to a new brand of baseball, highlighted by the best base running they had ever seen. It is bold, dashing, and the men are not afraid to slide or dive if there's any chance of making the bases. And then it says, but in all 8 of its markets, the association was transforming the public's perception of baseball, the perfect 2-hour escape from lives subscribed by hard toil. Hey, Matt, remind me, do you play vintage ball or not?
Yeah, I do.
I always say my happy place. When I'm playing it or watching, it only matters what is going on between the 2 white lines. So I also wrote down a quote, which is a little bit off topic, but when Hugh Nickel suggested it made sense to post 3 umpires, one along each foul line and one behind the plate, his proposal earned outright derision. So I'm going to throw this out there, and Matt, you brought it up a little bit, and maybe you'd like to expand on it, and maybe anyone else would like to add to it. What do we think of the level of baseball being played? There was no World Series between the 2 leagues, but what's our opinion of the quality between the 2 leagues?
I still believe that early on that the National League has the edge. They do have more of the stars. Now, don't get me wrong, Harry Stovey is great, and Bobby Matthews basically, threw the ball until his arm fell off. But I still think the National League has the stars. They have the established stars, and they do have the premier product. It's not really, I don't think, until maybe a couple years later where there's really parity between the 2 leagues, but it's a 1A and 1B scenario, if you ask me. There's really no way to tell unless we saw it in person.
Well,
because they're not playing together in a World Series, and we find out in 1884, a year later, with Ed Achorn's book, 59-84, that the Mets stood no chance against Boston. So,
well, from
that's just what you need to
1885
know.
to 1889, the American Association did fairly well in exhibition games against the National League, which, suggests at least there was some proximity in terms of parity.
If I may be permitted a quick promotional anecdote, I have done a little bit on the Philadelphia City Series in the 1880s. And as we know, the Athletics here win the pennant in 83. The Phillies go 17-81-1, yet the Phillies defeated the Athletics 5-4 in the City Series that year. Now it's an exhibition series. It's, preseason and postseason. There was no World Series, of course, and the Athletics are pretty much toast at the end. But I mean, that's a really bad baseball team on the other side of the city up at 24th and Ridge Avenue. So
Fair enough. Well, I appreciate that. Anyone else want to throw their 2 cents out there about that question or that sentiment? Okay. Sounds like everyone is good with that. So I have one more quote that I'm going to share with you guys, and then we're going to wrap up for the evening. Baseball goes on, but the men who made the game are forgotten in the desire to do homage to the new. Baseball goes on, but the men who made the game are forgotten in the desire to do homage to new kings of the diamond. I really like that quote because it just reminded me of all of us that do 19th century baseball research, that these players that we're talking about are forgotten. I mean, if you were to walk into anywhere and any city and mention, in Philadelphia, if you mention any of these players, Matt, I guarantee people would know who you're talking about. They would know who you're talking about for any of these. I would wager, Joanne, you could walk into a bar in Boston and say, "What do you think of King Kelly?" And they're going to be like, "Who?"
I was just thinking of that. Yeah, I was just that was right on my mind.
Yep.
And he's buried right there in Boston.
Yeah.
And had a field trip out to see his grave and the whole bit. And yeah, no, that's absolutely true. The thing is, in Boston, one thing to know about baseball and history and all that, 99% of Red Sox fans do not know about anything beyond 1967. It's all a fog.
I would wager they don't know anything beyond what's their first title, 1990 whatever, or 2004.
Well, 1967, you know, and there's a little bit of mist in between that, yeah. But
Yeah,
they know
fair enough.
nothing. They didn't even, most don't even realize it was baseball back then, even though you have to point out to them that, well, Fenway Park was built in 1912. You know, oh, really? Oh, well, yeah, think about
Oh yeah. Where do I get the beer?
Well,
it. Right, right.
well, funny you said that because I've long, being a Chicago Cubs fan, I've long felt that most fans think the Cubs started with 1969 or with the Cubs blew it to the Mets or Ernie Banks or something. When they want to know the greatest home runs, they'll just always pick something in the 1960s. Never heard of Gabby Hartnett or Hack Wilson or Tinker Evers a chance. It just come completely over their heads.
Oh gosh, I know that. Yeah.
Tinker to ever to chance.
Yeah.
Latest Cubby Bears.
Yes.
No,
So
just another
I
quick
just
anecdote.
go ahead, Matt.
Another quick anecdote is, this season we've heard how about the White Sox, and I got to tell you, I've really enjoyed following that whole story just because that's hard to do what they did.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of stuff that came out about worst team in history, worse than the 1962 Mets. And Joe, I just looked at it on your author bio on Amazon. You wrote a book about the legitimate worst team in baseball history, the 1899 Spiders. So this 19th century stuff gets forgotten so often, but that affords us the opportunity to tell their stories. And it's so long ago that some of these stories seem so fictitious. Which makes it all that more colorful and a lot more things to talk about. So it's a good way to educate. But yeah,
I think
prior to 1980, nothing happened.
I think I'm just going to throw this out there. I would almost say that the cast of characters in these books that we read about and we talk about, Jumpin' Jack and these other folks that are out there and what they do is they're characters, but they're also real people. Because I mean, you realize that they are, they make a lot of money, but they're still real people. I mean, a lot of them left the game and went on to just normal everyday careers. And I think it's really interesting that, we have this amazing cast of characters. You can watch the Yankee game over here and I have nothing in common with Giancarlo Stanton. I mean, the guy makes more money than I'll ever see in my lifetime, but can I see a kid from Yale who's part of the Glee Club and, pitches an inning, lives his dream? Absolutely. So I just thought that was a really interesting quote to end with, because I think it speaks to all of us and what we do. So with that, I have no other thoughts I was going to throw out there. If anyone else wants to make any comments about anything in the book whatsoever, or if we want to wrap it up for the night, floor is open.
Can I say something about the Cardinals?
For $1.50. It's going up. No.
In 1992, this is a true story. In 1992, the St. Louis Cardinals organization celebrated their 100th year in professional baseball. That's not good, because it wasn't their 100th year in professional baseball. It was their 110th year in professional baseball. And they missed the opportunity because in 1982, which was their 100th anniversary in professional baseball, they won the World Series.
Yep.
So even the St. Louis Cardinals, the modern era St. Louis Cardinals, which are, came from the old St. Louis Browns and, the American Association Browns, that's the same franchise. They didn't even know their own history at the corporate level. That is insane.
I love, just to real quick on that, Joe, I love the comment that he put in there that basically how they wore crimson that year of 83. And it was like that special 1 year where they wore crimson and then they went to Browns the next year. And he mentioned about it hearkening to that's where the Cardinals really kind of came from. I thought that was awesome.
Yeah. It'll be interesting to see what Major League Baseball does in 2026, the 150th anniversary to the extent to which they recognize it.
Yeah,
That's right.
that's right. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
No one else has
Okay.
anything else. I will hand it over to Peter and or Bob. Thanks everyone. Sorry for being a little humorous, but it's Monday night and
Monday night.
it's a good night amongst friends. So
Yeah.
thank you for indulging me.
It was
Thanks very much,
entertaining,
Paul.
Paul.
Thank you, Paul, very much.
Thank you, Paul. Did a great job again,
Yeah.
as
Excellent,
usual.
excellent.
And I like the way that Ed acknowledged somewhat the 19th Century Committee in his acknowledgments, and went on to say that they had always responded to his queries on the 19th Century Baseball chat group. So that was nice to see that in the book. Well, thank you so much, Paul, again. And next month, now he signed on earlier. He had to, I think he had to say he had to tuck the kids in. Next month, we have one of our new members, Larry Dake, who's going to take on John Thorne's Baseball in the Garden of Eden. And I gave him my blessings and good luck. It is really a kind of deep book, and it's full of a lot of, as John calls them, the secret history of early baseball. And we'll see that in November. And then in December, about 60 days from now, we have Matt's final treatment of the 4-book series of John Bauer, who I believe is online tonight also. I just got like an email earlier this evening from one of the chapters that said that he was going to be speaking virtually. So he might have cut into us a little bit. But anyway, we're looking forward to that, Matt. And you're right, this book, you said in the beginning, Paul, this book did dovetail so perfectly with the series that Matt was presenting, because it was like a kind of microcosm. You know, here's an example of a team, you know, with 2 teams, and what they were about. Okay, so next up, just so all of you know, if you are inclined to join us, we have our 19th Century Baseball Speaker Series, which we had to reschedule. And it's rescheduled for not this Tuesday night, not tomorrow night, but 1 week from tomorrow night. Justin McKinney will be talking about Jack Farrell, and it'll be on the 22nd of October. Same time, 8 p.m. Eastern time. I'll send out a reminder tomorrow night, and I'll send out a reminder the night before the presentation. And,
Peter, just a note on the Jack Farrell talk. Justin's going to go through his research. It took a couple of years where he found 2 different Jack Farrells being conflated in their record, how he sorted them out, and how he figured out which guy played with which team, because one of them had a very long career and one of them had kind of an intermediate career, but a lot of minor league stuff. And it's just fascinating how he sources and how he intuitively finds this fact and makes a jump somewhere else.
Somebody, it's the reason somebody sent me a tintype of 2 unidentifiable 19th century baseball players. They're in baseball uniform. The woman believes they're possibly members of her family because they were found among her parents' or grandparents' belongings, and but they're definitely 19th century. So not too many clues looking at the photos. But I did hand it over to 3 of our members, and one of them was Justin. Because he has that kind of he'll start by doing something. I don't know. He'll start asking this, what was your mother's name? You know, he'll start going backwards or something. So He's become quite a researcher. If anybody belongs to the biographical research committee, you'll see his name pop up quite a few times with the find of the month.
Gosh. Mhm.
You're right, Bob.
Yeah.
So anyway, so that'll be a week from tomorrow night, and that's a 19th Century Baseball Speaker Series. And then, of course, we'll be with Larry with John Thorne's book, and a month later we'll be with Matt with in December with the last of John Bauer's books.
And
Okay,
the
well,
speak-
thank you very much.
and
Huh?
the speaker series in November is Bill Hilbert.
That's right.
Uh,
Yeah, in November.
Bill Humber, excuse me. And see, Joanne, even I can't get it right.
It's
Yeah,
the age thing.
that seems to be, yeah, infectious.
But baseball goes international, talking about some games across the U.S.-Canadian border very early in organized baseball history.
Right.
So, see y'all. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
guys.
you.
Have a good
Paul,
night.
thank you very
Take
much
care.
again.
Thanks.
Go Bills.
Bye.
See ya. Go Yankees.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.
Be well, everyone.